Hi, I'm Jesse St. Laurent with SimpliVity. I'm the VP of Product Strategy. I want to talk a little bit about what we're seeing in the market with respect to cloud. As we all know, cloud has become a completely overloaded term, but we think of it in two separate dimensions. The first is cloud as an infrastructure. So whether you run in a private cloud or a public cloud, there's the infrastructure components of that environment. But then there's the management dimensions as well, and this is where the methodology of cloud management comes in. So if we think about what's required here, I'm just going to separate it, and we put at the top here, this is all the management components. So in a Cisco environment, this might be UCS Director, for example. This is what gives you that automated provisioning, the self-provisioning, the ability to give that control out to your users and allow those business owners to provision their own infrastructure and really provide some of their own management capabilities. But in order to deliver really application mobility, workload mobility throughout an environment, whether it's hybrid clouds or just within a private or public cloud infrastructure, you need a series of components underneath that. We need to virtualize the rest of the environment, and we talk about server virtualization, right? We have VMware and Hyper-V. We've all been doing that for years at this point. But there's other dimensions as well. You need to virtualize the network, and you need to virtualize the data. So if we look on the server side, we have folks like VMware and Microsoft and KVM. If we look on the networking side, obviously Cisco's ACI is a major player in this area in terms of giving you the ability to tie all of your policies to your workloads. So that instead of being tied to the infrastructure, you're truly abstracted. The software-defined term that has now become yet another overloaded term really is about abstracting policies away from infrastructure. We have this empty data area though, and this is where SimpliVity comes into the picture. We give you the ability to provide that abstraction to separate your data from the underlying infrastructure as well. And more importantly, to provide policies that are separate from the infrastructure. So if we put SimpliVity over here, what we now have is the ability to manage this entire stack through something like UCS Director. So as an example, if you have a workload that's leveraging all of these underlying virtualization technologies, you can now ask it to move from, say, Berlin to New York, or from New York to San Francisco, or San Francisco to Tokyo. And you're doing this without worrying about LUNs and shares and controllers and IP address and all of those underlying infrastructure components that were historically very complicated. Now, the management dimension of how you integrate and operate the virtualization becomes critical. So this is where it's very easy to say there's a REST API. Everyone and their brother likes to say, oh, we're managed through an API. But really, it's about the simplicity of that management interface. So we see the ability to control all of these components really being a key dimension in this cloud operating model. And specifically, if we look to the data side, you need to make that data mobile, you need to make it lightweight, and you need to create the ability to manage it. So taking things like the movement of a virtual machine, let's say, from Berlin to New York, and turning that into a single operation is a major step forward, right? So in a SimpliVity environment, not only is that available via REST API, but it's available as a single operation. Move my virtual machine from data center A to data center B. So it's not only about providing a simple API, but about making it an API that you can enable through a single command in your management orchestration layers of the system. The second key dimension there is if I've got my virtual machine that's being run, if we've got New York on one side and we've got Berlin on the other, so we can create that single command to move it. But oftentimes, there's a lot of data associated with that workload. So if that's a big SQL server, if it's some significant server within the environment, the movement of the data from one side to the other becomes a very laborious process. And if it's multiple virtual machines in a data store, we're now back into the weeds of storage management. And in order to enable really the operations team to have the power to run this type of infrastructure, we need to simplify that as well. So the way to make those virtual machines themselves lighter weight is leveraging data efficiency technologies and doing it in a way that's connected globally. So deduplication, compression, optimization, these all become critical, and this is a core part of what SimpliVity offers. So with the amount of data that needs to be moved to get that large virtual machine or that large data footprint from Berlin to New York might only be quite a small amount of data to get it from one side to the other. Now, what enables this is really the underlying technology. So if we drill in a little bit, what we have at the top here is virtual machines running on top of what we call a presentation layer. So within this presentation layer, we have a data store. The same way we think about data stores today. In a SimpliVity environment, that data store might be spread over multiple SimpliVity OmniStack systems, so it spans multiple 2U servers and unifies that into a single environment. But that data store now contains virtual machines or VMDK files that are associated with those virtual machines. This gives you the ability to manage it the same way, or for VMware to see it the same way it sees traditional storage. But for SimpliVity, what we do is we have another layer beneath this that you don't have to manage, you don't have to think about, that's filled with all these small data containers. And in some cases, these data containers may map directly to VMDK files that represent a virtual machine. It could also be that they represent backups. They could represent backups of these virtual machines. They could represent backups of virtual machines that exist somewhere else. But all of this information is completely deduplicated, compressed, and optimized, so it's extremely efficient. So when I talk about the idea of policy being abstracted from the infrastructure and being VM-centric, the policy is really applying to these data containers. And while we don't make you have to think about that and expose all those gory details, what we do is let that policy move the data from, if this is our Berlin location, and we have New York down here, move individual data containers, always in that dedupe, compressed, optimized state. So it's always very efficient from one location to the other. Once it's there, it can be restored or managed just like any virtual machine could. And it's the mapping between the virtual machines and the policy that make that so simple. So all of the policies applied to virtual machines, or groups of virtual machines, so we call that VM-centric. And you really only need three things to define that policy. You need to know how often you take those backups, you need to know how long you're going to keep that backup for, and you need to know where you're going to send it. In this case, New York or Berlin is the destination, abstracted away from the underlying details. So that gives us the ability to really manage our VMware infrastructure along with things like the virtualized network, the virtualized servers, together under an overall operational framework that allows us to embrace and get the benefits of the cloud management methodology, all within a SimpliVity OmniStack environment.